This week on The Destination Angler. What is it about the white that's just attracted anglers from all over the world? I mean, it is really world famous.
Oh, I tell you why. Almost certainly, number one is because it holds a very large percentage of trophy brown trout. In other words, that exceed easily 20 inches and fish up to 30, 40 pounds.
That's amazing. That's Davy Wotton on the White River. Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haig. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of The Destination Angler, brought to you by Anglers Coffee, perfecting the coffee experience for the fly fishing community and anglers everywhere with small batch coffee delivered to your doorstep. It's darn near perfect. By Got Fishing, crafting world-class fly fishing adventures specially designed to your level experience in budget. By Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app, helping you find new trout waters so you spend less time on the road and more time doing what you love, trout fishing. And by Adams Built Fishing Gear, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear built to last at an affordable price. Up next on the Destination Angler, we are headed to the North Island of New Zealand for some uncharted backcountry angling. Then we head to British Columbia to the wild and remote Spatsizi Wilderness for some off-the-grid adventure. And be sure to backcast to catch the last episode on the Indian River Lagoon in Florida with Captain Frank Catino. Stretching over 150 miles, anglers can lose themselves in a sea of mangrove shorelines, shallow grass flats, and numerous islands where great numbers of tarpon, redfish, snook, and speckled trout abound. You won't want to miss these shows. Want to be the first to know about new episodes? Well, head on over to the Destination Angler Podcast website and become a subscriber. You'll be entered to win a full year subscription to Trout Routes Pro. This week's winner is Joshua from Richmond, California. Congrats, Josh, and thanks for listening. Hope you love Trout Routes Pro as much as I do. Hey, if you like the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button and share it with a buddy. And today our destination is the mighty White River in Bull Shoals, Arkansas, and my guest is the one and only Davy Wotton. With over 90 miles of fishable water, the White River is an enormous tailwater system with a larger-than-life reputation, and deservedly so. Here anglers can tangle with trout only dreams are made of. Davy is a UK native and has been fly fishing and guiding on the White for more than 25 years. He's appeared on numerous TV shows and podcasts, is a fly designer, consultant, manufacturer of fly fishing gear, and a bit of a historian on fly fishing. But most of all, Davy is a fly fishing guide and teacher, managing his American International School of Fly Fishing. So listen in while Davy gives us a great overview of the White River system, competition angling, and how to go after those monster browns the White is famous for, plus innovative wet fly techniques that bring the big boys up for dinner. As a bonus, we cover where to wade fish when the generators are on and the water is high, and stick around to the end for some great stories of his close friend Dave Whitlock. Could the White be your best shot at that trout of a lifetime? Well, let's find out from Davy. All right, Davy, welcome to the show.
Yep, I look forward to speaking with you and enlightening the listeners. Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you for asking me.
You bet. You bet. So I got to start with, you've been in this industry for a long, long time, and you've fished all over the world. So maybe before we get into Arkansas and the White River, can you give us a kind of a rundown of some of your more exotic or maybe some of your favorite places to fish around the world?
I get asked that question a lot. And fishing is fishing, and moving water is the attraction, obviously, of course. But there are most definitely some areas in the world that, are a little different. New Zealand is one of those. And obviously, that my home waters over there in Wales, in the United Kingdom, they're a little different from what we have over here to some extent. And most definitely they don't get nothing like the same kind of fishing pressure. That's another thing. But the answer to the question really is that it doesn't really matter to me where I'm at. I've fished in some beautiful locations in Norway and many other most European countries, and I've fished in Turkey and places out there, you know, and all of them have got some liking. Let's put it like that, you know, to where you are,
Yeah.
particularly in areas where there's just not a lot of traffic. Let's put it to you like that. And that's not quite so easy to find here as it is in a lot of the European areas. And there are reasons for that. One, of course, is access, you know, because almost all waters over there are right there in ownership, so to speak. And there's no such thing as float trips on rivers over there. That's another thing. So it's all walk and wade access. And
Yeah.
But, you know, that said, if anybody believes that you can't get access to fish, that's not true. A lot of clubs and associations lease and rent water, or you get day permits or whatever. So yes, you can get as much fishing as you want. You just got to know how to go about doing it. That's it.
Over in the UK, you're saying?
Oh, and Europe too.
In Europe, okay.
Yeah, the same thing.
There's a lot of competitions in Europe these days. It seems like our USA fly fishing team's going over there on a regular basis.
Okay, if you want to talk a little bit about that, competitive fly fishing pretty much started in Loch Leven, which is a famous lake in Scotland in the late 1800s. And that was largely brought about by different fly fishing clubs, of which there are numerous numbers of them. And each club would fish against each other. Well, that later related more so to the international events where, you know, England, Ireland, Wales, and Scotland had their teams. And so they fished that. And then, of course, in later years, that developed further, pretty much by FIPS-MOOSH, which is the governing body, so to speak, so far as the World Championships are concerned. And so teams from different countries would compete at different events based on the country of where that event was to be held. So, you know, it could be in Czechoslovakia, it could be in Poland, it could be in Italy, it was over here at one time. So, yeah. And I did a lot of that. You know, 18 years I fished competitive fly fishing events, which I thoroughly enjoyed, you know, because you get to meet people from all over the world and their different means and styles and techniques of fishing and whatever else, you know. And so you build up that kind of friendship with those people, so to speak. That said, competitive fly fishing, certainly in Europe, by comparison to here, is big time. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, really?
You know, almost. Oh, yeah. I mean, every weekend there'd be major events. Generally, I might tell you, in most cases in the UK, they would be held on still waters. In other words, reservoirs, because they can accommodate more people at any one time. So they're going to be fishing out in boats. So there may be 60 boats out there, or whatever, and there'd be 120 anglers, because 2 anglers per boat. But there's also river championships too. So that's a big part of it likewise. But the other thing about that, you know, competitive fly fishing, or shall we say being brought about by techniques or equipment, is no question of a doubt has been an absolute major influence worldwide insofar as bringing about new techniques of fly fishing, and EU, what people define as EU nuke fishing, is typically one of those. Let's put it to you like that, which seems to be the in thing or whatever, you know, and that was largely related more so to the Czechs and the Polish guys, because they largely were responsible for that initially. And then you've also got what takes place there in France and Spain, and the French are absolutely, in my opinion, let's put it like that, probably some of the best fly fishers in the world. And if you ever have the opportunity to fish.
Why is that?
Well, a lot of that's due to the nature of the rivers. You know, they don't stock rainbow trout in rivers. That's the first thing. So in a lot of cases, you're fishing for wild fish. There may be some sections where they stock, but you've got to be really on your game to catch fish in some of those rivers. They're very unlike what we have over here. And of course, they develop high levels of skill, you know, and if they come to fish something like here on the White River, by comparison, it's easier for them to catch the fish because they're fishing with skill levels that are way above what the average person does. So, but there's no question of doubt in my mind that the French guys and the Spanish too. So if you ever look at the World Championship results, you will generally find about 4 countries are going to be guaranteed within the top 3, which may be Poland, Czechoslovakia, France, Spain, or Italy, somewhere like that. So, yeah, I mean, they're pretty much up there. But you know what? those guys are doing it all the time. They're, you know what I'm saying? They're on their game all the time,
Right.
and they're
Right.
they're so competitive and focused in their fishing, and to compete for the country, you've really got to be a high-end class angler. You're not going to get there through having one good day and that's it. You've got to be consistently good to achieve your position, as a member of the particular country's team.
Right. Now, Davey, you teach fly fishing. I'm wondering how does an average angler like me get to be, an above average angler like these competitive anglers? I can't spend 200 days on the water, but how do you up your game like those guys do?
Well, you kind of put the nail on the head right there to some extent. It's like everything else, if you want to be a high-end class clay pigeon shooter or whatever the case may be, the probability is of it, you're not going to do it if you only go like once a month or something.
Yeah.
You've got to tune yourself in, if that's what explain it to you. And the more you do it, potentially you may get better, but that's not necessarily true, because if you don't have the knowledge to put those skills into effect, it don't happen. And so really the only way you're going to achieve high levels of skill is, obviously you've got to have really good fundamental basics in the first place. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
You've got to have the ability to fish on a fairly regular basis. That's the next thing. You also have to have the ability to fish many different waters. You can become extremely proficient fishing your local creek because you know what to do and this, that, and
Right.
other. But if you went, say, somewhere else, like if you went out west, you might find that what you're familiar with on your own river ain't going to work. So it's a whole new learning experience. Let's put it like that.
Right.
And so, in many respects, you have to have somebody that can teach you what you don't know. Let's put it like that.
I agree with you.
And I think in many cases, it's like everything in life. Some people have got natural ability. There's no argument about that, in my opinion, because I've taught hundreds of people. But some people just don't have that natural ability. They can get so far, let's put it like that. And obviously
Yeah.
they enjoy themselves doing that. But there's a certain thing that is, you can't explain.
They're fishy.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
I taught bluegrass banjo playing as well, because I was a professional musician at the time in my life. And I can guarantee you, if somebody showed up and say, hey, I want to learn to play the banjo, you can tell within a relatively short time whether or not that person's got the ability to do so. There's certain things about
Yeah.
whatever it is, their coordination, how they do what they do, whether or not it's in their system to be able to do it. And some people, that just don't happen. That's how it is.
How much do you think it is just like interest level? Like I find some people just aren't that interested in fishing in general. They just don't have that in their DNA.
That's exactly right. There's a lot of guys I know here that are that way inclined. They go out, they enjoy themselves on the river, they catch half a dozen fish or something, and to them they've had a good fun day and they've caught some fish. Are they the kind of people that really want to pursue becoming highly skilled anglers? No, probably not.
Probably not.
Well, for different reasons. They may not have the time to be able to do it, or they're just comfortable with what they do. It's not in their makeup, as you say. It's not in their DNA to want to do that. But there are a lot of people that also want to become better at what they do.
I agree.
And, I got a lot of people here because, as you know, I'm highly skilled at the traditions of wet fly fishing. And there's certain fundamentals that they have to have before I can pursue that with them. And I can tell you now, unless they have fairly good casting skills and coordination, that you generally can't go much further, because that's a big part of what that style of fishing is all about. And also, a very great understanding of the water itself. You look at a piece of water and you say, where the optimum places where you're likely to find fish or not. What flies do you choose? How do you present them? Upstream, dead drift, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Let me just say this. A lot of the skill of fly fishing is based partly on experience. So I kind of tell guys this. I say, you go to the river tomorrow and you do this, that, and the other, and you end up catching no fish. Well, what did you learn? Well, primarily what you learned was whatever you did didn't work. It was wrong.
Yeah.
That's So therefore, that being the case, if you'd have did something different, were the odds more in your favor to catch some fish? And the probability is that it would have done. But you don't have the knowledge to be able to do that. Therefore, you've got to learn acquired skills to improve on what you can, at this point of time, is your comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
And so, regardless, I mean, you can, how would you put it? You can tell somebody this. I know for a fact that if you use these two nymphs, I will guarantee you that fish will eat them. Okay. But in order for them to do that, you have to present them in a manner that's acceptable to the fish to do so. So if you're fishing 4 foot above where the fish are, it ain't going to work too good, right?
Yeah.
So there's just things like that.
Just time on the water, maybe. And you said earlier, that somebody has to show you some of these things.
Yeah, that's right. It's time on the water, but you also have to be educated in what it is you should be doing or not doing.
Yeah.
And, there's so much stuff on social media, as you well know. And really, that just gives you knowledge. And what I mean by that is it doesn't give you the practical ability.
I hear you.
So
Yeah.
So the guy wants to go, whatever, dry fly fishing. He looks up all this stuff on social media, how to fish dry fly. So he ends up going to the river. But guess what? He saw it, but he doesn't have the ability to put it into practice, because you have to have somebody there beside you who knows what they're doing and say, okay, this is the degree of presentation relative to angle and drift that you need to make at this point in time. This is what you need to do with your rod and line control to get that fly to drift drag free. You can't learn that stuff really by watching what somebody else is doing. You've got to have somebody there who can tell you what you're doing wrong and how to put it right.
Yeah. I feel like things like reading water, that just takes time. I mean, you've got to catch a lot of fish before you figure out where they are, where fish hang out. And it's not everywhere, right? Most of rivers are devoid of fish. They're in 10-20% of the water.
That's very true in many cases. Absolutely so. Yes. And there are so many things that can, affect, shall we say, fish. Well, let's put it like this. The location of fish is very much determined by so many different things. Obviously, stream flows, current seams, this, that, and the other, depth of water, time of the year, what temperature the water is at. There's just so many things that you have to take in consideration. And of course, the more experience you've got, the more that you're going to come to terms with that. And that's like why I said to you, if you fish your local river on a regular basis, you're pretty much going to know where to go, where the odds are more in your favor to do that. But if you go someplace else that you don't or never fished before, you may not figure that out too easy, because the fish in that particular system may differ considerably from what it is you're used to doing on your own local water. Yeah.
Great. Good discussion. Hey, anglers. You've heard me talking about Angler's Coffee for quite some time now. And I have a question for you. Have you tasted it yet? Well, if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. It's darn good coffee, isn't it? Hey, if you're like me, tasting's believing. And believe me, this coffee tastes great. My wife and I are hooked on it. Angler's Coffee offers an impressive spectrum of flavor profiles, so there's something for everyone. When you're spending a day on the water, you need a great cup of coffee to carry you through, like the Coachman's Blend. Named after the famous Royal Coachman, you'll love the design of the bag as much as the coffee. This blend of medium and dark roasted coffee from Central and South America produces a flavorful and smooth cup with notes of chocolate and baking spices and a smooth finish. Order some today and save 10% with a custom subscription like I did. You pick the coffee blends you want, and they're delivered right to your doorstep. And if you're not 100% satisfied, they'll give you your money back, no questions asked. No kidding. A percentage of each sale goes to some great nonprofit organizations in the fly fishing community. So put a smile on your face, just like I did, and give it a cast. That's Angler's Coffee. Tasting's believing. With so much information out there, it can get darn right confusing and even overwhelming to find the right fishing adventure. Sorting through all the options and fees can be quite the headache. Well, not anymore. I'm super excited to introduce Got Fishing. Got Fishing is a boutique booking agency for world-class fishing adventures around the world. They ensure that you are on the exact fishing trip that meets your skill level, budget, and desired experience. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, Got Fishing's personalized service will help you decide which adventure is the best fit for you, your group, or even your business. Worry about fees? Worry no more. With Got Fishing, you won't pay anything extra because their services are entirely free for you. You see, Got Fishing exclusively partners with highly reputable outfitters who gladly compensate them for their services, ensuring a win-win situation. Explore the range of fishing adventures and learn more about the services Got Fishing provides at gotfishing.com. That's www.gotfishing.com. And check them out on Instagram, too. Let's shift gears a little bit here because I want to hear about the Ozarks and Arkansas and the kind of fishing you're doing down there. Could you give us kind of a high level on what the fishing opportunities are for the trout angler down in your neck of the woods in the Ozarks?
Yeah, I can. This particular area of the Ozarks, which is northern Arkansas, and I'm based there in the Mountain Home area, and I actually live real close to Shoals Dam. There are 6 trout water systems in the state of Arkansas, would you believe?
Huh.
In the southern area of the state, you have the Little Missouri, and then you have the Creek, then you have the White River, then you have the short 5-mile section of the Norfolk River that runs into the White River. Then you've got the Beaver tailwater, and then you've got the Spring River, which is kind of like up on the close to the state line of Missouri. All of those except the Spring River are tailwaters. In other words, water releases is based on what they let out from the lakes above. The Spring
Sure.
River is not a tailwater in that sense. It's pretty much a river that's dependent on water that actually comes out from a big lake, and it's at Mammoth Springs. We've got one of the highest flows of water from a spring in the United States that I know. I think it's the second
Spring
or the
River.
third. I can't.
Okay.
Yeah, the Spring River. The White River, of course, is a big river. It's about below Shoals Dam. Has about 100 miles of trout water, which is a serious amount of water.
Yeah.
Bear this factor in mind. In this particular part of the country, that it's not just cold water species that give you the options to fly fish. The whole area is surrounded in lakes and warm water systems like the Buffalo River, Crooked Creek, the lakes, farm ponds, you name it. You can pretty much go within an hour from Mountain Home, and within an hour you can fish anything you want, be it warm water or cold water species. So it's not just the trout system on the White River that is there for you. It's just quite unbelievable in that sense.
Is there some wading opportunities for the anglers? Like are some of these rivers a little smaller, like the Spring? Can I get in there and wade that pretty easily?
Yeah, pretty much. That particular river has pretty much consistent flow all the time because like the natural release of water from the springs pretty much stays the same. All of the other rivers that I mentioned are subject to generation issues. In other words, you can have very low flows, or you can have, in the case of the White River, you can have as much as pretty much 26,000 CFS of water if they open
rocking
8 of the generating rates. And that's one thing about the White River system. Right now, we're seeing a lot of minimum flow. In other words, that's approximately around 650, 700 CFS. And that gives you a lot of access to wade fish.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about it is that the access points are somewhat, if I was to say, limited. In other words, what I'm saying is most access points for public access are based on where there's are game and fish boat ramps or access points, shall we say.
Yeah.
Outside of that, if you've got, a friendly landowner that's got access to the river, fine, you can use that means. Other than that, the better opportunities are you use a boat to get you to some of these areas where you can wade fish. Let's put it to you like that. And which is what a lot of us do. So we can get places, where the general public are not congregated.
Gotcha.
The Norfolk River, which is the 5-mile section, is probably the most popular accessible wade water, certainly when it's on low flows, because you've got 2 major access points on that river to access to wade water fish, but you can walk upstream or downstream and whatever. But the only thing you have to be consideration is what they're going to do on generation. And that's so important on these rivers. You need to at least know what the likelihood of water release is. I'm not saying that they always keep to what they tell you they're going to do, and you have to be kind of wary of that, to be honest, because certainly on a river like the Norfolk River, that water comes up there in a darn hurry. And unless you are aware of it, you might get a problem, get yourself out of there. That's one thing about it.
Yeah. I've gotten caught on the Norfolk. We had to get out of there in a hurry. All of a sudden, the rocks started disappearing and the fish stop rising. You're focused on these rising fish, and you look around. All of a sudden, hey man, the water's coming up. Let's get the heck out of here. And like within 5 minutes, it was a raging torrent. In 5 minutes, we had to get out of there.
That's right. That is exactly right. People don't realize how fast, even on the White River, how fast water will rise, because when it initially starts pushing, that force of water is considerable. And even if you're, say, wading up to your knees, I can tell you within, as you just said, within 5 to 10 minutes, that water is probably going to be up to your waist. And it's much more difficult to move across that water force than you think. So, you have to, you need to be careful about that.
Hey, anglers. If you've been listening to the podcast, you already know Trout Routes has mapped and classified over 50,000 trout streams covering the entire lower 48, including 350,000 hand-curated public access points marked and ready for you to explore. But I bet you didn't know about a brand new feature called Trout Lakes. With a flip of a filter, Trout Routes Pro users can see over 12,000 fishable alpine lakes in the lower 48. You can turn this layer on in the filters menu to open up a whole new set of trout fishing opportunities. You know, there's nothing more exciting than finding that new trout stream, lake, or access point. I'm a huge fan of Trout Routes because they make it so easy. Say goodbye to stumbling around country roads looking for your next spot. Because Trout Routes provides every detail you need for each stream or lake, including public and private bridges, stream flows, trail access, where to park, camping opportunities, boat ramps, and a new feature to calculate actual river miles. How cool is that? No service, no problem. You can save maps for offline use. With Trout Routes, I've found dozens of new streams and access points I never would have known about. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for Trout Routes today on your Apple or Android phone. Are you an avid angler in search of top-notch fly fishing gear that's easy on the wallet? Well, look no further than Adams Built Fishing Gear. Adams Built is the ultimate choice for anglers who prioritize quality, affordability, and style. Established in 2014, Adams Built has been the trusted companion for thousands of anglers, creating unforgettable moments on the water. Seasoned pros and beginners alike will love their lineup of lightweight and durable waders and wading boots, high-quality nets and fly rod starter kits, and meticulously designed fly boxes and outerwear. When I first heard about Adams Built, I have to admit I was a bit skeptical. Having run through many pairs of waders over the years, I wondered about their guarantee. So get this, folks, all Adams Built branded products are guaranteed to last, and Adams Built waders carry a lifetime repair or replace guarantee. You only pay shipping. Hard to beat that. So why not make Adams Built Fishing Gear your go-to choice? Check them out at a dealer near you or at adamsbuiltfishing.com. That's Adam Built Fishing, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear. Let's shift to the white. What is it about the white that's just attracted anglers from all over the world? I mean, it is really world famous.
Oh, I tell you why. Almost certainly, number one is because it holds a very large percentage of trophy brown trout. In other words, that exceed easily 20 inches and fish up to 30, 40 pounds.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I will say this. I've never experienced the same thing here as I have on any other river in the world. You know, no joke. I've had days here with two really good fishermen, and during times when we've had major hatches like caddis, we've pulled out and lost, but we've actually brought to the boat anywhere from like 10 to 20 brown trout. I mean, big fish. Okay. Yeah. I don't know anywhere else you're going to do that. Not here anyway, for that number of fish. And I'd say, to answer your question, almost certainly it is the attraction to come here and catch one of those world-class trophy browns. And don't forget, this river's produced a number of them. The world record actually comes from the Little Red River, which is in Greers Ferry, which is 40 pound, 4 ounces. But I know a number of guides here, not fly guides, mind you, but bait guides, that have caught fish over 30 pounds.
Yeah.
but they're primarily fishing live bait, minnows.
Oh, are they on the Little Red or on the White?
No, on the White River.
Okay, on the White. Okay.
Yeah. So I will tell you this: those brown trout are an interesting species anyway in the first place. But I would tell you this: the average large size of brown trout you probably will fly rod catch is going to be in the larger sizes, somewhere between 20 inches, or shall we say, a fish are around 7 or 8 pounds,
Jeez.
thereabouts. Once those fish get over that kind of size, well, their food base is different. I'm not saying you might know an odd one or two if you're fishing big streamers or that, but you sure as hell are going to work a lot of hours to be able to get a fish like that, let me tell you.
Sure.
So, but that said, if you go anywhere and you catch brown trout or anywhere between like 20 to 30 inches, that's a trophy trout on a fly rod, no question about it.
Yeah.
So the attraction almost certainly is for people to come in and catch one of those trophy browns. That said, the White River has a number of different species. So we have brown trout and rainbow trout, of course. We have 3 different strains of cutthroats. So we have Snake River fine spots, we have Yellowstone and Bonneville. We have tiger trout, and also people call them golden trout. They're not really, they're palominos. Do you know what I'm saying?
Very different. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They're pretty looking things, you know. You
Yeah.
can see them a mile away. And we have brook trout. So there was the time, when I first come here, you considered like, we get the White River Grand Slam in the same day, catch a brown, a rainbow, a brook trout, and a cutthroat. Well, of course, we got more species in there now, and the chances of you catching all of those in one day, I'd say, are extremely remote. It ain't going to
Is
happen.
there?
But I'd still say to my anglers, if you can catch 4 different species, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, you've got a grand slam. You've got 4 different species,
Yeah,
because
for
some of the
sure.
others, yeah, they're not so easy to find. Let's put it like that. Particularly the cutthroats. I mean, the odds of catching 3 different strains of cutthroat in a day are pretty remote. And the brook trout are generally only in the upper section of the river. They obviously prefer colder water. That's the first thing. But they stock them pretty good, and for quite a while after they did that, we were catching. But I don't think too many of them survive. And the reason I tell you that is because the predation of brown trout and other predators, herons being a number one of that. And we got a fairly good population of bald eagles here too. And of course, they like eating fish. And then you got otters and and anglers too. I think a lot of the tourist fishermen we get, they don't know the difference between a brown trout, a cutthroat, or a rainbow, or whatever. And even though the regulations and signs tell them, this is the different species, they don't know. So they end up getting whacked on the head, and so we lose them, right?
Yeah. What's your personal best out of the White?
I caught a brown trout here that weighed, and there's an exception to the rule, that weighed 25 pounds.
Ooh.
And I didn't catch it. I did not catch it on a streamer. I caught it on a sailboat, and I caught it up there by the dam. And I was more than likely to get that fish, and I'll tell you for why. Because at the time, the water was dropping down from a generation. And in one particular area up close to that dam, there's an area that holds quite a lot of water as it's running out. And there were billions and billions of sailbugs there. And as the water was dropping, so those sailbugs were coming down in like these little rivulets. I mean, thousands of them. And these brown trout were just sitting in the pool below, and they were just gulping on these sailbugs. That's how I hooked that fish.
Wow.
The fish made a mistake. It took off and beached itself.
What? Huh.
Yeah, if it had got out into the main current, well, end of story.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way.
Okay, so this fish went the wrong way. It literally came up on land kind of
Yeah,
and beached itself. Oh my gosh.
on the rocks in that pool. Yes, that's what it did.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
The best rainbow trout I've caught here was just a little over 8 pounds. Cutthroat, 6 pound, 2 ounces. They were probably the most notable fish because, as you would imagine, I see hundreds of thousands of fish get caught here in my time, and Brown trout, 20 inches. Well, certainly, between 18 and 22 inches. By any stretch, they're not uncommon.
It's good fish.
Oh, yeah, they are. Certain times of the year make catching them a little more difficult. Brown trout wise up, and particularly when you have a lot of low water flows like we've got now, so boat traffic, angler activity, whatever, they ain't stupid. What will change that will be later on in the year when we get the caddis hatch, which really is the first major, shall we say, emergent hatch that they get into, and they will really get to going nuts on those. So often we'll catch a lot of pretty damn nice fish at that time when the caddis emergence is going on, and likewise too when we get the salt hatches later on. So in many respects, the hatches itself are putting it more in your favor to catch you a trophy brown trout, because they're just psyched into feeding on those. Once that happens, yeah, they get a little more difficult to catch. The other thing is the shad kill, if we get them. So the Bull Shoals Lake is full of threadfin shad, and right now the dam is closed. So they close that during the spawn season, and that don't open up till 1st of February. So if we have exceptionally cold weather in the lakes, which brings the lake temperatures down into the low 40s, and they generate pretty good water levels, there's a pretty good odds that it'll draw those shad through the dam into the river below. And guess what? Those fish just get to gorging themselves there. And you can end up catching some pretty damn nice fish.
Yeah.
The unfortunate thing today is, since I've been here, there's just so much traffic here on the river compared to what there used to be. It don't take long before that boat traffic going up and down, and they push them down. So you may only get, maybe an hour of good fishing, and then pretty much they're shut off for either, angling pressure, or they get totally stuffed with those shad. And if there's a ton of them, it don't take them like 10 minutes, and they won't eat no more because they're full up.
They're full. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. You never know where the shad kill will or will not happen. It may happen today, and you may not see it for the next 2 weeks. It's hard to predict that. Certainly there's times of the year based on water release and or lake temperatures where the odds are a little more in your favor, but there ain't no guarantee of it.
Right.
So a lot of people like to come here to try and fish the shad kill.
Yeah, you can't time it, huh?
No, not really. Generally, I've seen shad kills come through here in August, in the warm months of the year, because obviously the shoals of shad are close to the intake and they get pulled through. But typically, it's more in the earlier part of the year during the colder months.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantee of it.
I'll definitely want to get into when and how you're going after these big fish, and also I want to talk about wet fly fishing, because I know that's your specialty. But I wonder if you could kind of can you give us an overview of the 100 miles of the White? It's a big, winding, twisting river with lots of shoals and things, but how do you kind of break the river down for the fishermen?
Okay, I can answer that to you a number of ways. If we take, for example, the first 40 miles, that is from Bull Shoals Dam to the confluence of where the Norfolk River runs into the White River.
Yeah.
Stream of that sees probably more fishing pressure than anywhere else on the river. And there's reasons for that. One is access, i.e. boat ramps. Secondly, there's a lot of they're called trout docks, in other words. So you have some major resorts on the river that provide guide services and also rent boats, which is not the case when you get really much downstream from the confluence. So all of that relates to pressure in this upper section of the river. The other thing is that most of the brown trout, through Game and Fish surveys, determine that the majority of the brown trout, by percentage-wise numbers and size, are found in the upper 40 miles of the river, as opposed to the other 60 miles going down from the Norfolk. I can tell you from experience, there most certainly are some damn good fish down there, but not in the numbers that there are in this upper section.
Yeah.
And so that also relates to the fact as to why a lot of people choose to fish more so in the upper section of the river, for that reason I just told you.
Yeah.
That in consequence relates to ultimately fishing pressure, and certainly in the last 2 or 3 years is unbelievable. Well, since the year of COVID, let's put it like that.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I try to avoid that if I can because I know what's going to go on. There's no calm water. You don't really get, obviously when you fly fishing, you need to like drift to the banks and whatever. And when you got boat traffic up and down, and all that wave wash is coming across, and your boat's going up and down, it was like in the ocean, and it's pushing all that crap onto the bank and the other. Those fish get pissed off,
Yeah.
and they shut down. And so you really got to figure out the best times of the day to get out there. Usually early in the morning before most of the traffic, and after say about 4 o'clock when most of the guide activity is off the river.
Huh.
Okay, so if we go downstream through the confluence, the Norfolk River being such a short section of 5 miles, if they're generating sufficient water for boat traffic to get up to the dam area, once again, you see a lot of fishing pressure. There's a fairly significant trophy zone there, which supposedly eliminates people fishing other than, shall we say, artificial baits, be it flies. You can spin fish there too, but you're not supposed to use bait or anything like that. Unfortunately, the people don't abide by the regulations, and it happens.
You're talking about the Norfolk now, Davy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. On the White River, you have only 2 trophy zones today. The Bull Shoals Dam area, which is one of them, which actually just is a short section, ironically. It comes down to what we call the Wing Dam at the state park. And the other one is at Rim Shoals, which is approximately 24 miles further down. And it's about not a mile, really. After that, there are none. So outside of trophy zones, anglers can do what they want. Let's put it to you like that. So they can fish by whatever means they want, but they're not allowed to use, say, treble hooks, at least for bait fishing.
Okay.
That said, when you go downstream from the confluence, and I really like that section of the river, because you just don't get traffic down there like you see in this upper section, but it's pretty part of the river. There's beautiful bluffs down there. There's a lot of really good water. What I mean by that, good shoal water, obviously during the lower flows. And of course, you end up getting down there to Calico, which is approximately 60 miles from Bull Shoals Dam. And from there on, of course, you've got about another 30 odd miles before you get down to Sillamore. And there's very little commercial business activity in those areas, except right there down at the lower end near Sillamore, which is like 90 miles down.
Yeah.
But you just don't see the traffic in that section of the river. The downside is that the levels of water in that section of the river really have to be right. In other words, if they generate high flows here at Bull Shoals Dam, they've also got generated water coming out of the Norfolk at the confluence. Ultimately, what happens is the further you go down the river, then of course the fishing is not good because so much trash in the water. Because obviously, the further it goes down, the more it picks that stuff up. So ideally, if you have, in my opinion anyway, because I fished those areas a lot over the years, if you have something that ballpark of somewhere 3,000 to 6,000 CFS of water combined between the 2 rivers, that I consider to be really good water down there.
That's good water. When you say trash in the water, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so when water rises, inevitably it pulls off the banks.
Okay,
a lot of
gotcha.
crap. But not only the crap, as the water rises, it starts running off the banks like mud and silt and sand and, of course, gravel and whatever else. And, of course, the further you go down the river, the worse that becomes.
Okay.
So ultimately, if the river's running what I consider to be consistent, perfect flows, this is an unbelievable clear river. You can see fish down there a long way down. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's it. It kind of like a spring creek. That's the way it's named, I wouldn't tell you. But certainly when you get high levels of fluctuated generation. So if you have, say, for example, minimum flow right now, about 650, 700, and as today they cranked it up to 11,000, I can guarantee you, unless you keep well in front of that rising water, it's going to be pretty bad one way or the other. And not only that, it can shut the fish down. But if you're in front of that rise, it's also pretty good if you know what you're doing to keep in front of it for fishing, because as that water rises, so it dislodges food base off the bed of the river, be it whatever it is, sour bugs, scuds, or caddis pupa, caddis lava. You know
Okay.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. So that you catch the river when it's rising. That's what you like.
Yeah, if at all possible, yes.
Okay.
But eventually, when they run, if it's really high water and high water generation, that's going to be running around 3 mile an hour. Okay, so that tells you right there, you got to kick moving down that river in a damn hurry because it'll catch
Yeah.
up to you,
Yeah.
right? And then you got two choices. You either, crank up and you run down river 5 or 6 miles and try to get away from it, or you run way upstream and get above it where the water starts to clean and clear up because obviously the initial push is moved downstream and all that crap and stuff that was in it is way below you. So if you get upstream and you generally got cleaner water, certainly in this upper end, obviously, if you're closer to the dam, you're generally not going to get, foul water purely because there's nothing there that
Right.
can do that. But as it moves further down, you do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Is the sounds like there's a lot of things working against the fish as you get farther down the river. I imagine water temps are one of them. A lot of junk in the water. Are those the main things that are really causing the fishing to not be so good as you get farther downstream?
In the case of generated high flows, yes. The further you go downstream, the more iffy that can get. So, I mean, I guided on this river, uh, let me think, over 20 years. When I first come here, there weren't too many fly guides here, hardly,
Yeah.
very, very few. Now we've got a lot of these new guys here and this, that, and the other. I would tell you, when I first came here, that we saw a lot of a lot of low flows. There was no minimum flow in effect at that time. It was only 50 CFS of water released from the dam, which is nothing.
Really? Wow.
Oh, yeah. And nobody at the time, very few run a jet motor. They may have a 20 horse Mercury converted, but most of us all run prop motors, and I still do incidentally. So you'd run a 15 or a 25 maybe Mercury prop motor. You sure as hell learned how to navigate this river when it was like that.
Yeah.
It takes experience, and you bust up a few props or whatever the case may be just to learn how to navigate to get through certain sections. And it's an experience, I can tell you. And if take you, if you was out in the river in a regular basis, the Dovegate got probably customers with you, so the last thing you want to do is screw up, so you're stuck out in the river or something because you messed the motor up. I'd go out there by myself, and that's what I would do. So I decide, okay, I'm going to put in down here. I'm going to see how I can work my way all upstream to get up to wherever it was I was going. It's easy to float downstream. That's the first thing. Getting back up is another matter, right?
Right.
Yeah, because you can float over a gravel bar that's probably only got 3 or 4 inches of water, but you're not going to get up there in a hurry with a prop motor.
Not at
You
all.
you can't
Yeah.
do it, right? In fact, the situation today is even worse than it was when I first came here. The years of this high water generation has displaced a lot of structure. There's about 7 islands that used to be with trees on them and this, that, and the other. They're no longer there. They're gone. And
Huh.
so all that substrate, be it the gravel, the rock, all of that, once that is destroyed, or in other words, all the vegetation is destroyed, the topsoil gets washed off, and then inevitably all the gravel and the rock, all that gets pushed off and makes its way downstream. And that ultimately creates big areas of shallows of gravel bars and things. So, yeah, it changed a lot over the years.
Huh. No kidding.
Yeah, I know. It's just how it is. It's high level. They run 20,000 CFS of water. That is a lot of water.
That's a bunch.
Oh, yeah, and that goes on for day after day after day, and, it just moves everything. It degrades the banks and all of that stuff inevitably collects into the river basin, which is now a lot wider than it used to be. And of course, it creates those issues. So, yes, it's a little more difficult in that respect. But, ultimately, what I was saying was that's how I learned this river, not just, from being able to navigate it, but where fish were more likely to be
Right.
just on the levels of the water. And that's the one thing about one of the most important aspects of the White River system, as big as the tailwater it is understanding the river. How does water release relate to your options as far as where you will fish for that day? Are you in an area where you're going to get falling water? Are you going to get rising water? All of that is accumulative knowledge to know your options for that particular day. So what you would do, you would look at the prediction for the generation that day. So if they say, well, give you an example, just say at 12 o'clock tonight, they shut the water off from say 10,000 CFS of generation. Well, you know that if you go out in the river at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be back to the level that they run it down to, say 3,000. But if you were further down river, you've still got that 10,000 CFS either rising or falling out. Okay. And from years of experience on the river, you know roughly at what point of time it takes for that water to either rise further downstream or start to fall out, or you're the tail of the fallout. So that is very relevant to your options as far as the best options you've got anywhere, at least, so shall we say, so far as fishing and where to go on that particular day. Yeah. And it's very, very important.
Davey, what are people doing who are going after those big brown trout? And I believe it's in the late winter time when they're doing that, correct?
Not necessarily. The typical scenario is this. I don't know how well the brown trout will spawn this year because the water temperature's been up in the 50s, and that's not conducive to brown trout to spawn. They need water more in the mid to high 40s. And we've had so much of that warmer water. Let's put it like that. So what normally would happen, those brown trout would spawn in the right conditions somewhere, November, December. And of course, once they've spawned this summer, they pretty much go dodo, in other words, they just rest and whatever, they've eaten sufficient food through the earlier part of the year prior to that, and they're living off their body fats or whatever else. Then they start to become really aggressive. And so you're looking at, sometime maybe February onwards. And a lot of those big fish get caught at that time. And the reason being is because they're famished, they're hungry. So if they've got high water flows, a lot of the guys like to drift and fish large streamers to the banks and strip them back. Okay, that can work. You may get a shad kill, which is really good if that happens, because they will literally go ape shit on that stuff, let's tell you. And so, yes, for a period of, and of course, the bait guys, they may be going to use live minnows or they catch the shad and they use the shad, whatever the case may be. So, yes, at that time of the year, the odds are a little more in your favor to catch up a really big fish. Let's put it to you like that. Once that period of time is ceased, which it will, and that is obviously related to a number of different things. One is fishing pressure because they've wised up. Brown trout, he gets caught. He ain't so easy to catch the second time round in a relatively short period of time, So then you get more natural food base available to the fish. So they stock rainbow trout in the river. Well, guess what? Those damn brown trout, they know exactly when that stocking track is lost, dumping those fish at the boat ramp.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you'll see these big browns come up there and there's now these rainbows as they're coming off the stock.
Really?
Right?
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, I've seen that lots of times. And so these brown trout are now being given an abundance of food, shall we say, be it stock or rainbows. But then, of course, as the water temperature warms up, then so things like crawdads become active because obviously they pretty much hibernate in the winter. I don't know if people realize that, but they do, and they crawl out on the banks, they bury in the mud in the banks, and so they become active. Well, they got them on the menu, and they go after the bait fish in the river. So, and it changes their cycle. In other words, they're what they feed on and what they're looking for. So if you take a 10-pound brown trout, for example, and he gorges himself on a 14 or 15-inch rainbow, he's probably not going to eat another one for a while until he's digested that. Kind of like a snake, he snake eats in, they can go 6 months or a year, but then brown trout are like that too. On the other hand, they do stupid stuff. We've caught brown trout that have got the tail of a big rainbow sticking out their mouth, but they still eat a little fly. You think, what the hell? Why do they
Really?
do that?
Huh.
The probability is that they didn't actually go looking for it. The odds are that fly literally came right in front of their face and they just grabbed it.
Couldn't help themselves.
Yeah, can't help themselves. That's right. So yes, the answer to your question is the primary optimum times for the larger browns, generally speaking, are in the earlier months of the year. And of course, later on, as I said, they kind of get quiet. And then you have the caddis hatch, and that can vary, it depends on the water temperature and the atmospheric conditions. And it may start sometime toward the end of March, could be in April. And then once that starts, because the caddis hatches on this river, unbelievable. I've never seen anything like that in my life. I mean, there are billions and billions of caddis flies every day. It's unbelievable.
For weeks and weeks?
Yeah.
Wow.
But those brown trout, I'm not saying you can't catch them on the surface. You can. But generally speaking, I'll tell you that those brown trout don't come to the surface. They stay close to the bed of the river. And what they're doing, they're literally gorging on those pupa as they're moving downstream off the riverbed and ascending to the surface. So they just sit there and open their mouths and gorge on them. And I know that for a fact because I've did some the study on those brown trout as to what their feeding habits are, and that's one of them. And the other thing you might have happen is if they run high water flow generations, they'll gorge themselves on night crawlers, worms.
Sure.
Because they get washed out of the banks.
Yeah.
So, I can tell you a time a few years ago, this one particular area I was fishing, I knew for a fact there were a lot of good browns in this particular zone on the river. I knew for a fact they were there. And we tried a few different things, and that kind of got on my, I know darn well what they're doing. So we started fishing with what's called a Davy Wotton prism can worm. Let's put it like that. Once that fly went on and started being fished, let me tell you, it nailed those brown trout one after the other. And those fish were so gorged on night crawlers, they were full of them in the front of their mouths.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
That's
if
awesome.
you'd have carried on persisting fishing with like whatever, a pheasant tail or something like that, the probability is you wouldn't have caught one of those fish because that's not what they were looking for. They're looking for these earthworms,
So, Davey, you specialize in wet fly. At least it's something you really like to talk about. Tell us a little bit about your wet fly fishing experience. Why are you so excited about wet flies? It's kind of an ancient thing to be doing, isn't it?
Okay. Well, there are a lot of reasons for that. First and foremost, if anybody has knowledge of the historical aspects of fly fishing, which go back hundreds of years, that's the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
The use of what you define as the wet fly, in other words, a sunk fly, was how people fished. Obviously, they were limited with their equipment. In other words, what I mean by that is it was no such thing as you understand today. I mean, they would build rods that were anywhere 12 to 16 feet. Their leader systems were made with what you define as tapered or furled horsehair.
Oh, really?
That was attached to the rod tip, and to that was attached, as we call it in European way of thinking, a leader, and attached to that were the flies, which were also tied to horsehair, because there weren't hide hooks back then, right? And you were limited, obviously, by the length of the rod, how far you could fish with those flies. So typically, the length of the line would be related to the length of the rod. So the longer the rod, the longer the line. And that would give you more ability to fish further away, as opposed to if you was fishing an 8-foot rod. And so they would essentially fly those flies or fish those flies, so to speak, and they would cast them onto the water. And of course, hopefully they'd induce the fish to take, which in all probability in the earlier days wouldn't take long, because those rivers over there in Europe, there'd be thousands of fish in them. Not necessarily big fish, but it was nothing unusual, would you believe, for an angler to catch 50 or 100 fish a day. But they would only be probably 6 or 8 inch fish.
Huh.
Anyway, I was first introduced to fly fishing back there in the 50s by a person that did exactly that. And that style of fishing absolutely fascinated me because nobody really knew too much about nymph fishing back then. But that really took place, the history of that really goes more so to what took place on the English chalk streams, like the Test, the Itch, and the Kennet, whatever the case may be. And that was really brought about more so by the people like Skews, whatever the case may be. But prior to that, it was almost certainly wet fly fishing that was practiced. I'm not saying for one moment that the manner in which they tied some flies would not allow that fly to, for a short time, float on the surface. But bear in mind, the lines that they used back then, before silk lines came into effect, so to speak, would sink. And so that, in consequence, would cause the flies to sink. And it really wasn't until silk lines came into being where and of course, that also related to the fact that fly reels came into being, and then lines were made considerably longer so the angler could cast further. And then, of course, in the late 1880s, dry fly, as so to speak, as people understand it, became, shall we say, more knowledgeable. But most of that also orientated to what took place on the English chalk streams. That's not to say that didn't take place elsewhere. Let's put it to you like that. We can only refer back to the literature that was written in those times, so to speak. But that's not to say that was the whole story. Anyway, the act of traditional wet fly fishing is how we would find that, or in UK, let's put it like that. So if you say to somebody, yeah, where you're wet fly fishing, well, they may not necessarily understand quite what you're trying to tell them. They may assume, well, you're fishing a woolly bugger. Well, yeah, of course, the wet fly because it stinks. But in the truest sense, as far as the traditions of it's concerned, if you, an English or person in the UK would understand that to be a specific style of fly, i.e.,
Right.
like a wing wet fly, be it a March brown, a hare's ear, or a Dunkeld, or a Butcher, or Alexander, or something like that. And then you have, of course, the soft tackles. Most of that historically has literature written about it that relates to what took place in what we call the North Country, which was the northern part of England. And that's why somewhat it's referred to as the North Country style, i.e. soft tackles, like
Okay.
a partridge in orange and a hare's ear, or whatever the case may be at that. But that's not to say soft tackles weren't used in other places, because they most certainly were, because I can tell you for an absolute fact, soft tackles by definition, i.e. the style and nature of the fly, were used in other areas, be it in England, Wales, or Scotland. But nevertheless, it's a style and technique of fishing which is very little understood, if the truth of the matter be known, certainly here. It's still a widely practiced method of fishing over there, certainly in Europe, right? Particularly in the UK. There's no question of doubt about it. It is. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of people that really don't understand that, other than the fact that to them, soft tackle fishing is more or less casting a line across or slightly downstream and stripping the flies back.
Right.
Yeah, okay. I don't argue it won't catch you some fish as any other thing you chuck out there and do it catch you a fish. You could tie an egg fly on there and chuck that out and strip it back, and I guarantee you at some time or other it'll catch a fish, right?
Yep.
But that's not what it's all about. It's actually an art. It's a very skillful form of fly fishing that takes into consideration so many different things. Reading water, of course, is one of the primaries, to know exactly where you're likely to find fish. The choice of flies that you use, the manner in which you present those flies, be it dead drift modes or slightly animated modes or whatever. And certain flies have a leaning towards that style of wet fly fishing, so to speak.
Right. Say more about that. Like when are you using different styles of retrieves and casting and those sorts of things? Like give us some ideas there.
Oh, yeah. Okay. The typical scenario with a wet fly rig, or cast of flies, as we call it, is that you would be fishing as a rule 3 or 4 flies on detached droppers that are spaced approximately 25 to 30 inches apart, and the droppers being somewhere between average 4 to 5 inches. and the top dropper may be longer. So if we're using a 3-fly rig, the tail fly is defined as the point fly, the middle fly is the dropper, and the top fly is your top dropper. In other words, your bob fly. Okay, so the choice of flies is based on exactly what it is you choose to want to do, but more to the point, what are the fish doing? So, for example, we come to the river and we see some fish surface feeding. So we take into consideration, what are those fish eating? You know, are they eating blue-winged olives? Are they eating caddis? Or are they eating mayflies of some sort? Are they eating spinners? Okay. So if you have any sense, you would use flies that in some way have a representation to those specific species. The thing about wet flies is that they're not, if you like, anatomically tied. In other words, as you see how people tend to tie nymphs, you know, which I think in many cases, fine, you know, you want to tie stuff up like that in the vice, but, you know, does the fish really care about it? I'm not going to argue about that one right now, but nevertheless, so you're using flies that are caricatures. In other words, so if for example, say we have an emergence of blue-winged olives, which of course are a relatively small mayfly, so you would use typically flies that have an orientation towards use, and a water hen blower would be one of those, okay? Or small flies that in orientation of materials used. So they would have a grey hackle, for example,
Sure.
and they'd have a mulper body, right? Okay. So you would fish those more in a dead drift mode. In other words, those flies are fishing really close to the surface. And as most of us know, probably more emerging insects are taken at the time of transition from the nymph to the winged insect, i.e. dine if it's a mayfly, of course, that any other time. And largely that's due to the fact because the fish can see them a lot easier once they're in the meniscus or below the surface. So we do fish, and of course different states have different rules, mind you. I mean, in Montana you only allowed 2 flies, but that's okay. Here you could use 10 if you wanted to, but that's kind of not necessary. Let's put it like that.
Yeah.
So what you do is you present those flies upstream in a dead drift mode, so the flies actually track downstream at the same speed and movement of the surface of the water. And that requires you to instigate really good line control, so you don't cause those flies to drag or not be seen by the fish the way that the natural is. You also have to focus your attention seriously into where you know those flies are, because in that mode of fishing, you're not going to generally feel a pull. Sometimes you do, but generally you don't. So you're going to be looking for some surface disturbance, or you're going to look at the slightest indication of the furthest visible point of your fly line or leader that you can see. And if you really focus, you will see it, believe me. So you may see it slightly slow down. You may see it suddenly just stop because the fish took the fly in its mouth, and of course that stops the line proceeding. But yeah, and all you got to do is raise the rod so you hook the fish. Okay, so that's one node.
So let me ask you something, Davey. You said 25 to 30 inches apart. That seems like a lot. Why so far apart?
Okay, well, there's good reasons for that. A number of them relate to this. One is the closer they are, the more likely you get entangled. Because don't forget, in the process of the cast, as that line is furling over, those flies are hanging off those droppers. That's one reason. The second reason is that you don't want to confuse fish. In other words, if you keep those flies separated, the odds are fish will focus on one fly as opposed to seeing 2 and decide, oh, which one do I take, if you know what I mean by that. So that's another thing. The next reason is that you can actually present the flies and cover more water. In other words, to explain that. So we're looking upstream. I'm assuming directly upstream is 12 o'clock, okay?
Yeah.
So we're going to present the flies at, say, a 2 o'clock position. So it's what we call fantail. In other words, so as those flies are presented at the 2 o'clock position, the furthest fly is going to be probably 5 feet away from the fly that's closest to you, across stream.
Yeah.
Okay. So that being so, you're covering effectively more water. In other words, the odds are more fish within that zone are likely to see what you're doing. You don't cast directly upstream like you would a dry fly. If you do that, then the flies essentially are coming downstream in a direct straight line. In other words, the tail fly is directly upstream of your top dropper fly. That's no good.
Mm-hmm.
Those flies are going to be at a relative degree of angle away. That's important.
And that's so the leader's not over the fly, over the fish? Is that why?
No, that probably will happen, but it's the fly line you don't want over the fish more than
Okay,
anything
the fly
else,
line more
right?
than the leader. Okay, gotcha.
Okay. So what you generally do when you see fish working in the surface like that, or not, is that it's a process of covering effectively the water. So the first thing you never do is cast across stream, which I see people do all the time. Why the hell you do that? There's fish in front of you. Why are you casting 40, 50 feet over there? Because you're just lining them and you're putting them down.
Yeah.
So you start with relatively short, what we call short line casts. In other words, you've got virtually no fly line out the rod tip, only enough to be able to facilitate casting those flies. So you effectively fish that. It's what we call like pigeon tail. In other words, from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Look at it like that. So you fish that short section for a while, nothing happens. Then you extend your line, maybe a yard or 2 yards. So you gradually keep working out. So as you're doing that, you're effectively casting further upstream, but the flies are drifting, if you like, and covering more water on their track downstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And generally what you do with that style of fishing is you pick the flies up when they're more or less at a position directly across from yourself to the far bank.
Okay.
And you proceed upstream by doing that. So you fish this water. Okay, so you move upstream and you fish water that you previously did not fish. So you're always covering new water all the time.
Gotcha.
That's the trick to it.
So you're picking your lineup, Davy. It's going from 2 o'clock to just 3 o'clock, basically. You're saying right when it's perpendicular to the bank, you're picking up and casting again. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not a technique that, in that particular technique where you fish extensive drifts, you may be forced to. An example would be, 40 feet or 50 feet across the stream, which I can't access because the water's too deep. There's fish rising off that bank. And I want to present a dead drift mode of those flies to those risers. So yeah, I'm going to initially present a long cast directly upstream, probably at about a 1:30, 2 o'clock angle. But I have to then create a mend in that line by throwing what we call an L shape, and that allows those flies to track dead drift to those fish that are 40 or 50 feet away.
Yeah.
And then pretty much once you get to a position of more like, about 3 o'clock or a little more past, then you're going to create or get the issues of drag.
Yep.
And of course, that causes the flies to swing off that bank and come downstream and towards you. So it's kind of the easiest way to explain that to you is that, and I try to tell people this, if I was to tie 3 dry flies on your setup as opposed to 3 subsurface flies you can't see, you have to fish those flies in that manner.
Yeah.
In other words, you have to control those 3 wet flies like you would those 3 dry flies. They look at me stupid. And I said, no, you can do that. Because what it's going to teach you is how to create a drift of flies without adverse drag. All right?
Great.
Okay. Now, the other techniques that relate to slightly more to the 2:30 position, and you're tracking those flies for a certain period of time in a dead drift mode. But then once you get to somewhere like about 3 o'clock to 3:30, you actually raise the rod, and by use of the rod in your left hand, you track those flies so they come back across the river towards you. They're not going downstream. They're coming directly across the stream towards you. And so what you're doing, you're animating those flies with rod and left hand control, which is the means where you recover line in a manner where they really induce the fish to come up and take them. So, for example, you could imitate a skittering sedge coming across the surface of the water.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
There would be other patterns that you can use, which are not caddis orientated, shall we say, which will likely cause the same reaction from the fish. They see something that's moving on or near the surface, and they think, as they normally would, it's a natural insect, and they're going to come up and whack it. And I can tell you, I've I've caught some awful big brown trout in my life doing that. I mean, it, baby, they'll come up and hit that like a damn tank.
Animating the flies a little bit.
Yes, and you cannot do that unless you fish two or more flies, because you need the tail fly or the two flies below the top fly to act as the physical anchor. In other words, the drag that they cause or create in the water allows you to use that top dropper fly, which may be on a dropper 6 to 8 inches in length, and you can keep that fly skittering on and off the surface as it moves back across stream towards you.
Okay, I see what you're doing. Literally out of the water, bouncing on the surface.
Yeah,
Cool. That's neat.
yeah, I know. Let me tell you, I've seen thousands of times brown trout and rainbow trout come out of the water and grab that fly in the air.
That's a good day when you see that.
Yeah, I remember the first time I showed Dave, my friend Dave Whitlock, some techniques of wet fly fishing, because he'd never seen that done before. And we were down river there at an area called Steamboat Shoals, which is a nice little area to ray fish. And I was explaining to Dave what I was doing, and as the gods would have it, a brown trout of about 6 pounds come up and nailed that top dropper fly. And it was like 8 feet away from us.
Yeah.
Where we were fishing, and it blew his mind. He could not believe a fish like that would come up, and I'm pretty sure the fly used was the Silver Invicta, which is a very famous wet fly from the 1880s.
Yeah.
And he's going, I wouldn't believe that if I'd never saw it.
No kidding.
Because you can't animate a top dropper fly like that by itself. You can only caught, it's like saying you got one single dry fly caddis. You can only really cause that fly to skate on the surface. You have to have an anchor fly, or something else that's below it to be able to raise it off the surface, right?
Now, how did you get to know Dave Whitlock?
Oh, we known each other from the 1980s when he came over there to UK, and he came and fished on my local river with me at the time, the River Usk in Wales. And he'd always told me about the White River, how fantastic the fishing was, and these huge browns and this, that, and the other, And to me, a 20-inch brown trout from local rivers over there was like a monster, you know what I'm saying? I caught big rainbows in the reservoirs. I mean, huge rainbows, And anyway, I came to the US back and forth, because I did business over here. As you know, I developed all the SLF dubbing products and this, that, and the other. And one thing, and I got requested to come over here and do programs for different fly fishing clubs and stuff, and I did that. And of course, Dave lived here in Arkansas at the time, and ultimately, what happened was I came and stayed with him and Emily in the early '90s.
Okay.
And he would take me out on the White River, which blew my mind. I'm not, rivers in the UK don't have rainbow trouting. Well, there's one exception to the rule, but typically they don't, because it's not allowed to stock them in there in the first place. And he took me on the Norfolk River, and I did something that he'd never seen before. Actually, I caught in 4 casts a grand slam, which was a rainbow, a brook trout, a rainbow,
really?
A brown trout, and a cup trout. But it's a totally different style of fishing. Because typically you use a sow-bug or a red-buck spur nymph or something like that.
Wait. What did Dave say when you caught four different fish and 4 different casts? Do you remember what he said?
I don't remember exact words, but I do know he said to me, I've never seen that happen before. In 4 casts, you catch the 4 species.
I think I'd say, why don't you fish with me every day? That's just, this guy's pretty lucky. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah. So but the whole fascination of this river being so totally different to everything I'd fished anywhere else, it was unbelievable, It's like, damn, that, and also he introduced me to fishing with an indicator, and I'd never seen that before, because people in Europe didn't use no indicators. We used our fly lines or what you might call the Euro style of fishing. In other words, you flapped your fly and you looked at the leader, for the take of the fish.
Yeah.
Or if you were fishing at distance, you'd watch the end of that fly line, you grease it up with mucilin or something, and you would see the take. So when he first showed me that, indicator nymph fishing, of course, it made logical sense that you could suspend a fly at a relative depth for a long period of time for a drift, which, with relatively, with Euro
Yeah,
style nymph fishing, that's generally not the case. Fishing
sure.
short line or what we call rogue nymph fishing, the same thing, which is unbelievably effective. And, I got to talking to him more about that, and he told me one time that he had I don't know if I can think of his name, and Carl Richards, that's it,
Oh, sure.
who I
Yeah.
passed and gone. Yeah, very well known person in his day, and he wrote some really good books.
Yeah.
And that they were fishing. I know where they were fishing. They were fishing at Rim Shoals, and Carl Richards couldn't understand why Dave was catching probably 6 to 7 fish to his one. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, I'm using the indicator, and Dave told me, he said he couldn't believe how effective that was as opposed to what he was doing, which I could understand. I'm not saying by any stretch of imagination that's the all and be all, but I will say from understanding it, and of course we fish the majority of our customers, certainly in drift fishing on the river with indicator rigs, it is unbelievably effective. There's no argument about that. I'm not saying
Absolutely.
by any stretch of imagination it's the most efficient way at all times, but it does allow people to, shall we say, fly fishing a much easier way, let's put it like that, and catch fish. So yeah, and of course we became very, very close friends, and we fished together so many times.
Look at
He
you.
taught me a lot more. He taught me a lot about warm water species too, because we don't have those in Europe,
Yeah,
UK anyway.
right.
We don't have bass and stuff, and that blew my mind too. We go out on a creek or something, or on the lake, and we cast these top water bugs, and wham, up come this bass and whack that fly. That's so much. That's
How
so
about
much
that?
fun. Yeah, I would say this, and I've known a lot of very good fly fishermen in my life, and I've had a lot of people with names that have fished with me over the years, and I ain't just saying this because was a very close friend of mine. I missed the hell out of him. He passed away a year ago last November.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
Sorry.
he, in my opinion, and we're relating this to cold and warm water, not salt water, of course. He is probably, or in America anyway, most certainly one of the most influential persons insofar as fly fishing education.
Yeah.
And I know how his mind thinks. You know what I'm saying? Because I spent
Huh.
so much time with him. He's there won't be another individual like him. Let's
Yeah.
put it to you like that.
Heard he's a character.
He's, oh yeah, and his knowledge, so far as the development of things that he did, over here,
So much.
he had the greatest range of fly patterns that he had innovated, which at the time were being marketed by Umpqua. No one else will ever come close to the number of flies that they've had commercially produced by a commercial company.
Yeah. How many do you think that is? Like 60, 70, something like that?
Yeah, no more than that.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah, because it was all the flies that related to the warm water species, and obviously all the flies are related
Okay.
to the cold water species. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
so
that's
yeah,
amazing.
pretty unbelievable. Yeah, he gave to me one of the very few coats or jackets that Umka produced that they gave to their signature fly tires.
Oh,
And Dave gave to me the one that they gave him. And he gave me a lot of other personal stuff too, which,
oh, cool. That's neat. He's a special guy. He is a special guy.
he
David,
was.
let me ask you as we're closing out here. I wanted to ask you, you've been in this business for a long, long time. I can't imagine how many thousands of clients you've guided. I'm curious, like, what have you learned about human nature when it comes to fly fishing?
That's a good question. Well, the first thing I'd say is the observation more than anything else.
Yeah.
There are very few people that you guide or whatever that I would consider to be very observant people. And your powers of observation have a great deal to do with your ability to be a good fly fisherman. It's not just a question of, chucking out what you got on your fly rod out in front of you. You have to be observant about what's going on around you on the river. Did you see those few fish rise over there? And I say to the passengers, they see those two fish right? No. What?
Yeah.
Well, why? Or
Right.
wildlife, you see different species of wildlife around you. And also, on the river itself, when you get to the river, before you even think about chucking flies out in the water, observe what's going on. Forget about just all of a sudden wading out in the river and start thrashing and crashing away. Pay attention and observe what's going on. Look at the water. That water is telling you a whole bunch of stuff. Roughly where you're likely to go find fish, where the seams are. All of that is so important as opposed to just going out there and going at it. Are there hatches going on? Do you see any fish surface feeding? If you do, what are they doing? Are they feeding on midge? Are they feeding on whatever it is? Obviously, in a large species like a caddis, you probably see it. But smaller species, it's not so easy to do that. All those things you could take into consideration before you even think about progressing further out into the river and start fishing.
Yeah.
So that I consider to be a very important thing. Powers of observation, no argument about that.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and then of course your abilities. Let me just say this. I would say this, and I'm not being disrespectful to anybody that listens to this, but there are very few fly fishermen or people that fly fish that I would put as high end, either by their knowledge or their skills, or both. I would say that for many, their downfall, more than anything else, initially, is their casting skill. There's no argument about that. If you do not have good casting skills, you are very much restricted to what you can or cannot do. Okay. So if you don't develop the skills, for example, to effectively control and drift a dry fly, well, then you're not going to have much fun doing that. You're not going to. But on the
Right.
other hand, if you're one of the kinds that, well, I'm going to go wade fish, I'm just going to chuck out a woolly bugger, chuck it across stream and strip it back. Yeah, fine. I know, going to catch you some fish, probably going to enjoy yourself. But did you learn anything? No, you really didn't. You initially learned how to do it, but are you going to, increase your skills or your abilities by just continuing to do that? No. Do you want to do that? Do you want to learn more skills? Or are you just one of those, well, no, I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
Yeah,
That's
that's
okay.
okay.
That's
Yeah.
fine. You go and
Sure.
enjoy yourself.
Some people like
On
that.
the other hand, if you spend a day with me and you want to learn more about the skills of dry fly fishing or wet fly fishing for that matter, are you prepared to go out there and suffer days when you don't catch next to nothing because for whatever reason you weren't observant about what the fish were doing or your abilities just don't,
Right.
shall
Or
we
you're
say,
learning.
relate to what, and then what you're probably going to do is relate back to your comfort zone. You're going to go back there and you're going to start fishing your olive woolly buggers. You have to understand that, to learn skills, there's a period of time where you're not going to really benefit from that learning process, so to speak. You've got to develop those skills, and that takes time with the right instruction and your ability to really get on top of it.
Having a teacher like you.
Yeah, and there's some other good guys out there too. I mean, I don't know if you've interviewed my friend George Daniels or not yet. Have you?
I'd like to get him on the show. He'd be great.
Yeah, he's a good one right there. But if they don't have casting skill, it's a big problem.
Yeah.
For example, I could take two guys on this river that have never fly fished in their life before, never had a fly rod in their hand, and they're going to fish with an indicator. And as long as they can get that out on the water and 20 feet, 25 feet away from the boat and watch that indicator, and if it goes down, hang tight on the line and raise the rod, the odds are they're going to catch a fish. If you put them on the water by themselves, of course, they have no clue, right? So you educate them in that sense of the word, and that's fine because that's part of what it's all about, being a guide. You teach people, you educate them, and they have fun doing that. Would they pursue to want to really develop higher levels of skill? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I think in many cases, the majority of people that we deal with don't have the time to go actually fish on a regular basis. They don't live close to a river where they can do it. So,
Yeah.
they come in for their 3 or 4 days on the White River and they probably don't get to fish too much elsewhere,
Exactly.
whatever the case may be. It's a limitation, there's no doubt.
All right, we gotta wrap it up, Davey. This has been great talking to you. I got one more question for you, and that is, where can people go? The hungry, thirsty angler. At the end of the day, what are your favorite places there near the White River?
Okay, so the main area here is Mountain Home, which is approximately about 25 minutes from where I live, which is up here by Bull Shoals.
Yeah.
There are a lot of restaurants down there and places you can go drink, whatever the case may be. In the immediate, and there is over there over in the Norfolk area as well, Salesville, that's called, same thing. The closest place here, which is a good restaurant where I live, which is between Flippin and Bull Shoals, is the 178 Club.
Oh, okay.
Then you've got Gaston's, which is a huge resort there on the White River. They have a good restaurant there, so you can go there.
All right.
But you can consume alcohol at both of those two places I just told you. Or you end up going down Mountain Home and you can go to whatever restaurant you want. There's Chinese restaurants there, there's Thai restaurants, or plenty of that stuff down there, that kind of stuff.
Thank you so much for being on the show. So appreciate it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and hope the listeners gain a little more information about it. You know, if we ever get another time to come back and talk more about the rudiments of wet fly fishing, I'd love to do that with you.
Oh my gosh.
I can go into that in a greater detail than what we were able to.
We'll have to do that. So how can people get in touch with you?
Okay, well, they can go to my website, which is davywottonflyfishing.com.
Okay.
Or they can phone or text me at 870-404-5223.
Oh, wonderful.
We provide, obviously, guide fishing services, as you know.
Yeah.
Teaching and instructions as far as skills of fly fishing, whether it be union fishing, traditional wet fly fishing, or whatever. If you want to learn better casting skills, anything you want to do, fly tying, whatever the case may be. So, yeah, we can accommodate anything that you want to do.
And you've got a fly fishing school, and you've also got a YouTube site, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, we do that stuff too.
Very good.
But we're going to do some more of that YouTube stuff later on this year. But I get so booked up about, doing different things, man. I don't get half the time to do what I want to do.
I hear you. Yeah. Well, Davey, I wish you extraordinary success in all your adventures to follow, folks, and thank you so much for listening. We'll be sure to post Davey's info on our Destination Angler show notes, and as always, you can DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shaig50@gmail.com. If you like the show, please share it with a buddy. As always, our music is by Brothers Found, a great little band out of Colorado. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again soon. Tight lines, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.